podcast brought to you by the EY Foundation. The EY Foundation supports young people on free school meals to access paid work experience, employability skills, and career opportunities. We do this through a variety of programs and partnerships that meaningfully join up both sides of the labour market. I'm Kathryn Eastwood, Director of Income and Employer Partnerships at the EY Foundation, and it's great to have you back with us for a new series. Today's episode is going to be particularly aligned to our work as we look to recognise Social Mobility Day 2024. We're going to explore the current state of social mobility in the UK, the factors influencing it, and look at what can be done to improve it. Before I introduce our guests, let's look at the wider context. What do we mean when we talk about social mobility? In its narrowest definition, social mobility is the link between a person's occupation or income and the occupation, income, or social status of their parents. Where there is a strong link, there is a lower level of social mobility. Where there is a weak link, there is a higher level of social mobility. It's fair to ask if it's important to focus on this link, so let's look at why we do. Professionals from lower income backgrounds on average receive a salary that's 12% lower than those who come from more affluent backgrounds. We also know that young people on free school meals at the age of 16 are 3 times more likely to be unemployed at the age of 27 than their peers. Also, when we look at these outcomes through an intersectional lens, the class pay gap is deemed to be even worse for women and those from ethnic minority backgrounds. So, yes, this link is incredibly important. Many of you will know that the EY Foundation is a charity dedicated to advancing social mobility in the UK. Myself and my colleagues are passionate about this issue, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the ways that we can create systemic change by supporting both young people and employers. So, needless to say, I'm really looking forward to what I know is going to be a meaningful conversation on what is such an important topic. And as ever, I'm not alone. Today I'm joined by two fantastic guests, Edel Harris and Natalie Stuart. Edel was appointed the chair of the EY Foundation in December 2023. Before this, Edel served as the CEO of MenCap from 2019, prior to which she spent 11 years as the CEO of Cornerstone Community Care. Edel previously served as chair of the Life Changes Trust and the Scottish Government's Social Investment Fund. Edel was the first woman to be president of the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, and her other non-executive director appointments include the National Care Group, Robertson Trust, and Aberdeen Football Club Community Trust. Edel was awarded EY Scottish Entrepreneur of the Year in 2017 for her work with Cornerstone and received an OBE in 2021 in recognition for her services to the public sector and charity. Natalie Stuart grew up in a small town near Blackpool. After completing her A-levels in business studies, sociology and religion, philosophy and ethics, she went on to study at Huddersfield University. She enrolled in social work, and after her third year, she took a sabbatical year to serve as president of the student union. Natalie left university with a BSc in social welfare and now works at EY as a people consultant in Edinburgh. Right, so let's get into the episode. And Adele, I'm going to start with you. So, firstly, hello, and how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm delighted to have been invited to join this conversation today, as you said, on such an important topic. And apart from a little croaky voice, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, we're so glad to have you with us. Firstly, Adele, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became involved in the field of social mobility?
So, social mobility, although I probably wouldn't have used that language when I was a young person, has always been really important to me from a personal perspective because of my background and my family circumstances, but also as I've developed and grown, throughout my career, primarily in the charity sector. I've seen the importance of giving everyone an equal opportunity to thrive at work. So, just a little bit about myself. Although I don't have an Irish accent, I am Irish. I was born in the south of Ireland quite a number of years ago now. And my family were very poor. We were a large family, 8 children in total, although I lost a sister at a very young age to pneumonia. So there's 7 siblings now. My father was unemployed and we were homeless for a while. So I came personally from a very different, I guess, class or set of circumstances that I find myself in today. And so I guess I'm a personal example of when social mobility works, when you are afforded a good education, when you're presented with opportunities and you work hard and you take them, what can be achieved. But I think more importantly than that, as I say, it's not just about my own experience, it's about seeing other people throughout my working life that are disadvantaged because of where they come from, because of their protected characteristic, because of their low income background, or maybe poorer opportunities in terms of education. So I feel really passionately about the topic.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And thank you so much for sharing your background and can clearly see why it's led you to where you are today. In terms of right now and all of the incredible things that you're still doing, what continues to motivate you to be working in this field?
Well, I've always worked either in public service or in the charity sector. And I think that's because I'm driven by a real passion for what I call, for brevity's sake, social justice and
Mm.
equality. I've worked for many years with and alongside disabled people, for example. And it's quite astonishing that in this day and age, particularly in a country like the UK, that certain parts of our society are still excluded and disadvantaged. So I'm driven from a place, I think, of wanting our society to be fairer and more equitable, and making sure that all individuals have an opportunity to improve their circumstances, regardless of their background or where they're from.
Definitely, and I'm sure that's something that's going to resonate a lot across our team and people listening as well. Natalie, it's a pleasure to have you here too. Thank you so much for joining us. You'll have heard my overview of social mobility in the introduction, along with a bit of a textbook definition. But what do you understand social mobility to be, and why is it so important to you?
So I think it's about the difference between your occupation or your income and that of your parents. So my dad, he's disabled, and my mum, she was a cleaner, but she now works looking after disabled people in a care home. And it's about getting a job of better quality of that of your parents, which is, I think, quite challenging for a lot of young people because you don't get the guidance that people whose parents are, for example, a lawyer would get.
And Natalie, was this something that you were aware of when you were a lot younger, for example? You mentioned earlier about climbing the ladder. Is that how you thought about it? Did you feel that you wanted to get a job and have a status that was different to that of your parents, or did that even come into your mind?
So, from a young age, I wanted to be able to support my parents financially. They gave me a lot of support growing up, and I wanted to be able to repay that to them. I was aware that when I got older, my dad would need support. For example, he might need a chairlift in the house. So, the only thing that I felt that they would need that I couldn't kind of provide would be money. I didn't know that social mobility was a thing really until I was finishing university. I was applying for various kind of graduate schemes and jobs, and some of which said that in order to be eligible, you needed to come from a Russell Group university, which I didn't know what a Russell Group university was. So it sparked a discussion with people within the Students' Union, and they basically explained to me what social mobility was. And I was astonished, really. I didn't realise that your income, your social background could have such a great impact on your earning potential and where you may end up in the space of careers.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Adele, actually, just thinking about some of the themes that have come out from what Natalie said there, were you aware of the term social mobility? And again, were you aware of thinking that you wanted to change your own status or strive for something a lot different to what you'd known?
Certainly not as a young person. I mean, we left Ireland and moved over to live in England. My dad applied for work with the prison service because at the time you got a house if you went to work in the prison service. So we moved over to England And I was always encouraged by my parents to work hard at school. We all were. But as a family, university was never discussed. I did go on later in life to get an open university degree in health and social care, but I didn't go to university as a young person. And when I think about my peer group, my friendship group at school, the majority, certainly of the young women, were encouraged, let's say, to take up jobs such as, administrative jobs, nursing, potentially, but not at graduate level. Teaching was another option. But university wasn't presented to us as an option at all. So I guess in terms of social mobility, I wouldn't have understood the term, I don't think, at the time. But I was very conscious that the set of circumstances around me, my parental circumstances, my family circumstances, the lack of funding to leave home, for example, all of these things played a role in what I went on to do immediately when I left school. But I didn't really have a peer group amongst my female friends. There are some exceptions to this of people who went to university or aspired to go to university.
Hmm.
And I know that isn't the only way to advance. There's lots of other opportunities to get apprenticeships and to go into work and work your way up through an organisation. But it's often seen as the doorway, if you like, to one aspect, certainly, of social mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, definitely some similarities in what you've both been reflecting on and what shaped your thinking going forward. I mean, we know that social mobility is a systemic issue and it's not something that we as individuals who care deeply about it, or we as the EY Foundation, one charity motivated to make change, we're not going to solve this issue ourselves. And we know that employers are a big part of that picture. And, for me personally, my role at the EY Foundation is to work with businesses and employers to help them better understand the challenge that they're facing around social mobility and understand the ways that they can advance it within their organizations in a way that supports business too. Adele, from your experience, how do you think that employers contribute to advancing social mobility?
Well, I think when we look at the UK at the moment, I don't have the statistics to hand, but I understand that the UK as an economy, as a country, has faced challenges in achieving higher levels of social mobility when compared to some other countries of similar size. And social mobility has been relatively stagnant with limited upward mobility for people that have been born into lower income families. And I think the employer, whether that's the employer of a small family business or the employer of a huge corporation, I think employers have a critical role to play. Just simple things like looking at recruitment processes as employers, how we design advertisements, what recruitment companies do we use, because all of these things send out messages that this job is for you or this job is not for people like you. So I think even at that early stage of thinking about how you build a really diverse and inclusive workforce, employers could start by looking at the way they carry out recruitment. But of course, there's so much more that they can do as well in terms of, spotting talent, giving people confidence, helping workers with their self-esteem so that everybody in your workplace has the same opportunity to grow and develop, investing in training, in learning. There's so many things that employers can do. And of course, it's in their best interest to do it because we all know from lots of research that's carried out in terms of employers and great businesses that if you're a great place to work and that you invest in your staff and your colleagues, then you have a great business, whatever that business is, whether it's in the private, public, or third sector.
I couldn't agree more on all of that. And I think it's something that we talk about quite a lot, that too often, whether it's social mobility or diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly, are still seen as something that is nice to have for a business, something that's an added extra if there's the additional time, capacity, and resource. But actually, what we know is, and what research tells us is, social mobility is really good for business. And more often than not, stakeholders, whether that's employees or consumers or customers or investors, they want to know that the organization is purposeful and cares about the social impact it's making. One stat that I always seem to remember is that if and Adele, you were saying yourself that UK is really lagging behind in terms of social mobility, and if social mobility in the UK was to get to the average levels of Western Europe, that would result in a 9% increase in GDP for the country. So, all of the evidence does point to the fact that it is really good for business. Natalie, from your point of view, what do you think, or is there anything that you've seen employers do really well when it comes to social mobility? Or are there things that you think they could be so much better at?
In terms of what they could do much better at is when you're applying for jobs or graduate schemes or apprenticeships, you often fill in a questionnaire and it asks about your social background. So, did you receive free school meals or what is your parents' occupation? And when I was answering those questions, it almost made me feel unwanted and
Mhm.
degraded because I thought, well, I'm not the kind of person they're looking for because I'm constantly answering yes on all of these questions. And if they gave a bit more context into we're asking you these questions because we want to diversify the workplace, we want to have people from all backgrounds and make sure it's representative, then that would have really helped to boost my confidence and self-esteem.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. It's actually back to what Adele just said about almost like the subtle messages that employers are giving out. So, Natalie, if you're saying that even in those early stages of recruitment or of the adverts of a job, if you're getting that feeling that you're not the sort of person that they want, then clearly those subtle or not so subtle messages are still there, that actually it doesn't feel like a completely welcoming environment. And then Natalie, personally, maybe you alluded to a couple just now, but have you experienced things that you would see as significant barriers to social mobility? And can you tell us a bit more about those?
When I was growing up, the majority of my friends didn't go to university. There was no pressure on me to go to university. But when I was looking at jobs in my surrounding area, I realised that there wasn't many that were high paid and that I had to move away to get a good education and to open up more job avenues. And that was very challenging because I went to university in the north of England, which is where I'm from. But in terms of moving further afield, often universities that are Russell groups that are in big cities, they have much higher living costs, which you simply can't afford to pay. I worked multiple jobs whilst I was at university so I could survive, but my rent was £85 a week, which is very cheap compared to some other universities. So I think just getting by, I
Mhm.
guess, is challenging.
Yeah, and then you mentioned about, maybe your friendship group at home not necessarily putting any pressure or incentive on you to go to university. And it's something that Adele mentioned too, but the people that we surround ourselves with do have a big influence on us. So, what do you think about the idea of role models? Did you have people you looked to when you were growing up that made you think actually that's the kind of career path I want to be on, or somebody that you could look to for advice?
I think my dad was one of my biggest role models. I gave him quite a lot of care growing up. He's an amputee, and he taught me very important values because I am fully able, both physically and mentally. So it is my duty to support people who are less advantaged than me in that space, which is why I wanted to do social work because I realised that, a lot of people needed that support. My brother, he is in the army, and my sister, she's a nurse. So I guess it was very traditional for me to want to do a caring role. But what I found out when I was on placement at university was that I couldn't actually help people in the way that I wanted to do in the social work career because the system was broken, not enough funding. And that's why I kind of pivoted, moved to EY because I could support people in a different way.
Would you say that then having role models or people like that are critical? Like, what advice would you give to younger people who potentially would have been in a similar situation to you were?
I think they're really critical. It's hard when you don't have anyone that's gone to university that you can look up to and ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have anyone that's gone through that process and got a higher quality job, I guess, then how do you know how to go through that process of finding a university, applying for jobs after university, and knowing those options that are available to you? I think a lot of people, especially from lower income backgrounds, look at employment that is in their surrounding area and not further afield. For example, getting a job in London wouldn't have been an option for me after university. So having those connections, whether that be by talking to people on LinkedIn or reaching out to various people, that's really important because they can give you a steer on what they would have done in your position.
That's the thing with social mobility. There's so much that is unbelievably easy to take for granted unless you don't have it. And you just said it yourself, connections are still what are so important. And those who have more privileges in many different ways will find it easier to have those connections, to have role models, to know the different jobs that are out there and how to go about getting them. But it's ensuring that we can have as many young people as possible from all walks of life, from all different backgrounds, having those same opportunities. At the foundation, we always talk about our programs. Obviously, the programs provide young people with their paid skills training, the paid work experience, mentoring, but it is that foot in the door, that opportunity to see the workplace, to have their chance to show how much they can give to an employer and how they can feel so welcome and so part of a business that, as you just said, mightn't even have been in their radar because it's not in the local area. It's those connections that are so important. Adele, what changes would you like to see in the next 5 to 10 years to improve social mobility for young people?
So it's obviously not one thing. That's maybe a very obvious thing to say. It starts really at a very young age. I think a lot of what we're talking about is related to confidence and self esteem, alongside all the other things that we've discussed so far today. And so, really at a very early age, it's not just about having access to good education, which I think is a human right that every young person, whatever their background, especially in a country like the UK, should have access to really good quality education so that they can learn. We know that education is a sort of a key to so many things. But it saddens me, I think, particularly at the moment, following the pandemic, that so many young people appear to be suffering from some form of poor mental health or struggling with their confidence and self esteem. So I think there definitely has to be some investment at a very sort of personal level in giving young people the tools that they need to believe that they can do and be anything. And you talked about role models a moment ago. We need to see people like us, people who've come from the places that we've come from, who've experienced some of the things we've experienced. We need to be able to see them in big public roles so that we can, identify and say, well, he or she's done that, then it must be possible for me. But there's so much more to say to this. There's education, there's funding. I mean, the jobs that are being offered need to be well paid. There has to be an investment, we've already mentioned this, in things like vocational training programs. There needs to be really clear pathways so somebody can go into a job and not just think, great, I've got a job, but have the potential or the opportunity to have a career, so some pathway to career advancement is really important. And then, how wide do you want to go? We need the government to think about reducing inequality. We need more progressive taxation. We need more social welfare initiatives. We need affordable housing. All these things are barriers to mobility. So, to do that question justice, I'd probably need a whole podcast.
That might be episode 2 related to this, because we definitely could sit and unpick those things. But I think, what you've alluded to there is just the various layers. That it's such an intersectional challenge, isn't it? And we obviously focus quite specifically on the employability side of it. But once you start to peel that away, the layers of how ineffective the entire system is pretty stark. And Natalie, what would you like to see in the next 5 or 10 years with regards to improvements in social mobility? Is there anything stand out or anything else you want to add there?
Definitely improvements in education and knowledge sharing. So a lot of big corporate companies, they reach out to select universities, leaving out a large population that may not live in those big cities or have the privilege of going to an institution like that. So I think ensuring that knowledge is readily available to people and that they don't need to necessarily go out and find it, because if you don't know what you're looking for, how are you going to find it?
Exactly that. And, it's interesting that you've both put education up at the very top there. I totally agree as well. But it feels like the way that if we're looking at emerging technologies and even the way that things have changed for all of us and how we work since the pandemic and how there's been so many shifts, we know that we can absolutely harness emerging technology and AI to help with some of those inequities and social injustices. So that's one area of work that we're looking at a lot in the foundation, is making sure that with the advancement of those technologies, it only serves to support less represented young people rather than making those disparities even greater. So it'll be a real interesting space, I think, to watch over the next few years. Natalie, what advice would you give to young people who may feel that they're on the periphery of opportunities or they don't have those connections that we spoke about earlier?
I think don't give up. The sky is your limit. No matter how many times you get rejected or knocked back from a job or an apprenticeship, don't give up, because you are so valuable as a person, and your background does not impact your future life. Just because you grew up in a working class background does not mean that you can make a substantial amount of money and have a very grand job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if anything, again, something that we speak quite a bit about is looking at your background and taking so much pride in all of those elements of it that made you the person that you are today, and whether that's resilience or innovation or creativity. Because I know sometimes even the term social mobility can divide people about what it means, and should we want to move class, and do we want to leave working class behind and forget about who we are? But it's absolutely not about that. It's having your background really help shape who you are, and taking all those fantastic bits out of it as well. And I mean, just hearing you describe how impressive your whole family is in terms of what they're doing and how they're all in sort of service careers, I'm sure it'll be really inspiring for people to hear as well. If you think back, Natalie, can you think of any experiences that have been really pivotal for you on your journey so far? Were there any things that really changed your direction? And Adele, I'm going to ask you the same question so you've got some thinking time.
When I was president of the Students' Union, the COVID pandemic had only just started, and it kind of shifted my perspective. I was very focused on having a lot of fun with my friends and maybe not doing as much studying as I should. And I had a lot of spare time to research careers, who are the top employers, what do I need to do to gain those skills, and try to really get submersed, whether that was through volunteering or trying to gain an internship. And that really helped me to kind of look wider and think, well, what can I do with the skills that I've gained whilst in education and outside of it, and how do I really want to help people? I've known that I've wanted to help people my whole life. It's just figuring out how I want to help them.
It's interesting because obviously none of us could have predicted what was going to happen 4 years ago. We're in a very different space, but actually it's exactly like you said. It's taken the opportunity that's handed to you, whether we expected it or not, and making the absolute best of it. And it sounds like you did just that. All right, Adele, over to you then. Any experiences that jump out that have been really pivotal in your journey?
I think the critical period, I guess, in my life, in the context of going on to have, a pretty successful career, was leaving the police service, that was my very first job. I joined the Met Police Cadets when I was 17. Very male dominated profession. As a male or a female officer, you couldn't work part time, there was no job share. It's hard to believe that now. So I left when I had my first child because it was impossible to continue with a career in the police and be a parent. It just wasn't possible. So that gave me a little bit of time to think about what I wanted to do next, because I always imagined that my career would be in the police service. And so two key things happened at that time. One was I started working just part time in the NHS because it was a paid by the hour job that fitted in with my children's school hours. And there was someone in the NHS, in NHS Grampian at the time, who saw something in me. There was an environment in that organisation as well at the time for people to try things. There was lots of opportunities for learning, new skills. So I took every opportunity that was presented to me there, and with the support of this female boss who, as I say, saw something in me and gave me the confidence to do my Open University degree, because you couldn't really progress in the NHS in public health if you didn't have that qualification as a most basic requirement. So I think having someone who, as I say, for whatever reason, saw something in me, wanted to support me, wanted to help me to get on, that was really critical. And of course, if the Metropolitan Police had the policies that they have in place today, in those days, in the early or mid 80s, who knows, I might have become a chief constable.
It's always interesting to look back and wonder the different directions that life could have gone. But it's really interesting that you said that about, referencing your former boss, because if we all look back, I think everybody, regardless of who they are, what job they're in, their different levels of seniority, everybody can think back to one person who gave them a chance and most likely put their life path in a completely different direction. So, we all owe it to ourselves to think about that and to think about what role we can all play in ensuring that everybody has that chance to take the path that they deserve, and that they shouldn't have to rely on just one individual to help them do that. And then just finally for you, Adele, what advice would you give to maybe young people listening to this podcast, thinking about their next steps and unsure about what they might do with them?
I'd say a few things. I think the first one is to echo Natalie's words, to take every opportunity that is presented to you and to have confidence in yourself and in your own ability. Because, whether you've become the CEO of Mencap or whatever you might aspire to in your career or not, there will have been many times when these people that we look up to in these very sort of high powered roles, there'll have been many times when they'll have been knocked back, when they've had poor performance reviews or when they've applied for jobs and not necessarily got an interview. So for me, I think the most important piece of advice would be around confidence in yourself and in your own ability. But I'd like to make one other quick point, if I may, because obviously we're talking about social mobility and everybody in society having the same equality of opportunity. But we should also remember that there are some people, for example, people who have a learning disability, who may never be in a position to climb a corporate ladder or to maybe go to university or even come out of school with any recognised qualifications. But everybody has choice. Everybody should have access to opportunities to work, whether that's paid work, whether that's volunteering, whether that's contributing to society in some other way. So, although obviously social mobility is critical and everyone should have the same opportunity to do well and to improve their circumstances for themselves and their family, we must also remember that there are other people in society who maybe won't aspire to that high paid job, but their contribution to society is still as important and they should still have every opportunity to be the best they can be.
It's such a well made point. Natalie, I'm just going to go to you for one final question. So I asked Adele about the advice that she'd give to young people just starting out their careers. I'm going to flip the question slightly for you. What advice would you give to employers who are recruiting their next wave of the workforce?
Give people a chance. Because someone might not have the same background as you or the same accent as you, doesn't mean that they can't fulfill the job to a very high level. I think people are often quick to judge without realizing that often when people come from working class backgrounds, they gain a lot of skills, if not more skills, than someone from a middle class family would. For example, they may be an absolute excellent budgeter within the firm because they've managed their family's finances.
That's an excellent point. And you know what? Probably such a good way to end, bringing us to a bit of a natural close. I think we could probably talk a lot longer about this topic because I know it's something that we all care really deeply about. And I think it's safe to say that there's a pretty long way still to go when it comes to tackling social mobility in the UK and beyond. But it's always good to hear from people who care deeply about it. And us at the foundation, we're working with some great partners in this space, and we're working closely with employers and with EY and looking at emerging technology and the various different ways and policy, etc., that we can play our role in convening people who really care and convening businesses to get around this topic and to make lots of strides in this area. So maybe next time we get together, we'll have a different story to tell. Who knows? Thank you all for listening. If you liked today's episode, please click to follow us and leave a review. And please share the podcast with somebody that you think would benefit from hearing it, as we want to try and help as many people as possible, whether that's young people or somebody else in business thinking about these issues. So once again, thank you to our two fantastic guests. That's all for today. In the meantime, keep an eye out for our next episode. Thanks again for listening and see you soon.